When thinking of villains constantly, I cannot help myself but think of new ways to talk about the same infuriating ones because of how much I actually have hate for those ideas that the people wanted to produce. And this hate has led me to believe that Hans is the worst Disney villain that has been ever created. It's something that most people know well, considering how many times we discuss villains or twist villains pertaining to Disney, where even though I ranked Callahan lower as a terrible villain, Hans just remains to be one of the most infuriating Disney villains of all time. One that almost destroyed all villains in the state that we are in nowadays. Like literally looking back on it, he is the catalyst for Disney being so terrible these days, and that is something to despise on a whole nother level beyond stories and just into Disney itself. Like no other villain has accomplished this task to destroy the company, where you know that everything that involved other Disney properties after 2013 took a turn for the worse, and it all comes from a mid-movie like Frozen. And if I were to be honest with you, when I watched Frozen in theaters when I was 12, I really thought it was one of my favorite Disney movies ever. Like I loved it so much and got way too hooked into the fandom at the time, where by the time the sequel came out, I actually realized how shit of an opinion that was to me. I really didn't watch the sequel when it came out either, but it really showed the growth of my character arc, unlike this stupid little bitch. Like literally as time grows on, I get more infuriated by Frozen every single day as a franchise and the original idea of the Snow Queen about what plans they originally had, especially including Elsa as the original villain, still being Anna's sister. I mean, the more I think about it, it seemed like a better idea to have and straighten the entire sister story of Frozen, whereas you know, Kristoff and Hans aren't relatively important to that kind of story, where in the case of Kristoff, you kind of forget he even exists in the sequel. Like, yes, he's there, but the movie just doesn't focus on his story as a character at all, being unnecessary, where of course, that film had no villain whatsoever, which I also blame Hans for because of how stupid his character was, that set up no direction for the series to take and totally undeserving of the money it made beyond other stories like Moana. Hans really is the prime example of a badly written character that was shoved in to become a villain because they didn't have the time to rework other parts of the story. Because, I mean, when you look into it, they say his character was first partially based on the evil mirror in the original story of the Snow Queen, which of course was just a mirror, and they wanted to allude to mirrors or facades in the story, like how they name Hans, Kristoff, Anna, and Sven after Hans Christensen Andersen, or just having him to be the mirror to Anna early in the film, shut out by older siblings which she can actually relate to. And then when we take a look at deleted scenes like with evil Elsa, his character was originally going to be named Admiral Westergaard, possibly an older figure who was chasing after Elsa, where the directors explained that earlier versions of the film had Elsa as the villain throughout the entire film, or you know, Jane to becoming sympathetic because Anna is her sister. Of course, reworking it into thinking that it would be better to have Elsa the way she was in the final film. This deleted scene has Elsa show that Hans originally did love Anna for real instead of what we got, so you can see they kept some of those elements and didn't really have him as the main opposing villain, where it just seemed like they mostly changed Elsa during this process, which had to make him the villain instead. But the thing about this change is that it really doesn't make any sense at all when including the Duke of Wesselton in that very picture, who in the trailers and the majority of the film acts antagonistic, discovering sorcery from Elsa, much like Frollo was shocked at the disappearing act of Esmeralda as witchcraft. Because when starting back to his introduction, we just see a handsome young prince that Anna becomes infatuated with once again, looking like a mirror to the same red-headed hair, and of course a prince adding to his connection to their very characters. To some, this is great for their twist villain because he is presented as nice and charming, but for others it just makes his character arc much worse because of how stupid he is and how we know of the motivations of his character and the full plans to use Anna. Like it won't make any sense when we go along, because where you see at first in this scene and what he looks like, it's just a typical prince who gets charmed by a girl, but knowing the finale, it's actually a guy who wants to kill her sister so he can become king by also killing her instead. Like literally, this entire picture somehow spells I'm a sociopath who wants to kill two sisters to claim the throne of Arendelle. There's nothing to suggest by his attitude in the ball and whatnot that he's willing to kill the royals to take the throne, because this movie doesn't really suggest death unless it's their parents or just killing. Like at the same time this happens, we see the Duke once again presented to us, more comedic in this role to become a trade partner, which sets up this nefarious villain plans for his character to go against our heroes, where there is just clearly much more to him than there is to Hans, where later in the film he is just forgotten for the majority of it. During the same scene, we also get this great conversation of the mirror reflection with Hans and Anna about older siblings shutting them out, where although I really think it's great for both of these characters to understand each other, you still constantly think about his underlying motivations here, and throughout the song, Love is an Open Door, that has a double meaning to it. Like you connect with how each other actually feels in the moment, understanding little bits and and pieces of what they've told us, but then you don't because he wants to justify his attitude against his older brothers by taking over another kingdom. Love is an open door for Anna because she finally has someone to actually relate to, while Hans in this case means I found some dumb bitch I could use to be king. Like, that doesn't make any fucking sense to me at all. The surface of the song makes it more obvious to the viewer that they have a connection before meeting Kristoff to flip another side of the coin for Anna. How initially they are synchronized with each other, but then ruins the whole point by going to propose to her and knowing his actual motivations. Once again, this moment seems great for two characters of the same mirror reflection, but still ruined by this writing that says, oh my goodness, she is too naive and too easy to actually commit to my stupid ass plot. I mean, you can make the argument that this is great for its underlying twist of character, but you have to take in the whole story for that to count, where you can't just pick separate pieces of one seriously flawed plan to actually realize that. This is where I actually want to go back to their initial conversation on the balcony and how people actually liked his character from the book A Frozen Heart, where I actually hate because it's not connected to the movies at all, and just like Big Hero 6's series to explain Callahan's sympathy, they just brushed it off in the movie because they'd never planned the movie and the book at the same time. This book actually explains that Hans went through more abuse from his brothers because he was the youngest, both physically and mentally, where his father actually also hated him, where his mother actually cared for him. This sets up his character to try and prove his worthiness that his father didn't see in him and his brothers also couldn't, so he can escape this abusive cycle, which is very sympathetic to be towards and adds more weight to his connection to Anna. But then, of course, they actually ruined it because he discovered Elsa has a sister, where his plans were changed to kill her and instead marry Anna at the same time to clear the throne, and that doesn't actually make any sense, and the movie never made these points clear to us anyway, so it really didn't work, especially when he gets sent back home to his older brothers as the movie implies, and once because of how everyone actually hates him in the end, and of course in the sequel content where we see him shovel manure and still hated by Arendelle with a snowball shoved in his face. Like, they really make it clear in Disney and other films that they hate Prince Hans to an extreme degree. They don't want him redeemed, and he can never be redeemed in their eyes. But this goes back to Elsa, where they propose this to her, where at the very least she tries to make her sister see the rationality of the situation, but cannot because Anna is embittered by being shut out, which is great parenting by the way, where he tries to add but he lets the conversation be to let them work it out. No suggestion of overall villainy here, where of course we then get revealed to her ice powers, pointing back to the Duke with his untrustworthy attitude showing and continuing because of his paranoia of sorcery and making him the villainous focus. It's not focused on Hans because that's not what the movie wants to do. They want to do it on the Duke instead. It just doesn't allude to that unless you count the scene where after he's concerned for Anna's safety chasing after Elsa, he immediately accepts his role in charge for the time because the princess said so, but not really done well enough, where he is built enough to care about Anna while the Duke at the same time was built enough to become a villain of the film by the looks of things, blaming Anna for being a monster with powers too. It just doesn't make any sense, and I really do not like it at all. They just make it so clear that he does not trust anyone here, including Prince Hans in the situation, because he has committed to the fact that he does not like anyone with powers, but the movie refused to continue that plot point. And rewatching everything about this movie, it just becomes more apparent that Anna also is the most stupidest Disney princess that has been ever created. She's not in the official lineup, but she is surely stupid. Going back to Prince Hans, we see people appreciate him for the work he is trying to do to keep them back on their feet while they're suffering through an internal winter. And while some might say that is good manipulation on his part to gain trust as a ruler, I would argue that is what any sensible individual would do anyways if they were put in charge of a harsh winter storm. Totally fine for a regular non-twist villain to do so, where it's just made much more worse when he finally reveals it, switching back to the Weasel and his obvious villainous attitude. And thinking about this just makes me so furious at Disney for casting Alan Tudyk in back-to-back years as the obvious villainous choice. Like Alistair Gray in Big Hero 6 was the obvious choice from the beginning to almost the end, but they didn't do that, having someone else as their twist villain instead, where originally they were actually going to go with that obvious choice, but they didn't. Where thinking about that, it would actually make much more sense to serve the story much better if they just had him in that role being that way and what was presented. It just makes way more sense than what Callahan did at all, or anything that Prince Hans actually did at all. Like, why are you making Alan Tudyk the throwaway villain? Is it because you already used him as your best twist villain in Wreck-It Ralph? Are you going to make him a twist villain in this new Wish film as the GOAT of this film, instead of twisting the actual main villainous threat that you're going to present? Like, it's not a great choice when in Zootopia you also have another character named Duke Weaseltown that is also voiced by Alan Tudyk that made him this important important where it solidifies villainous intent who wants to stop Elsa no matter what, which I really hate because I do not know how these people think killing Elsa would stop the eternal winter. That is the most stupidest thing I've ever seen thought up. It's just that when you have someone pictured as clear as present threat, it becomes hard to convince people that the other twist works because clearly he's working on the side of the good guys no matter how hard you try to convince people. It's just his plans to turn against them later on in the film. It's a simple choice. You have a villain and you have to stick to that. If you have another villain in that film that twists, you cannot make that work. It just becomes more apparent how much he cares for Arendelle's trade rather than the well-being of the citizens, and that's something you have to oppose, where once again, by this point, the movie would have been better served by a real opposing threat, including Elsa as a villain also. I really think that actually would have been a better choice for the sister story, or just focusing on them rather than having a villain like these turds at all. But going back and later in the film when they try to get Queen Elsa is where we have these two guards have the orders to kill her, making this more obvious in his villainy on the Duke's side, where no harm is to come to Elsa on Hans's very orders. He makes it very clear he wants to find Anna in the process because her horse went back home, but knowing his plans, he actually does want to kill Elsa to take over the throne to commit to his plans, which doesn't make any sense at all. Why are you trying to save her if you want to kill her to take over Arendelle? Like, they really make it obvious that these two men are actually out to kill her in this scene, while Hans and the other Arendelle guards are just coming up there to stop them and capturing Elsa. Hans actually yells at her in the scene to not be the monster they fear her as is, knowing they're on murderous intent because apparently she is a monster and they are going to kill the queen to stop that, and he actually stops them in the moment, knocking her out. And doing that actually makes him a worse villain than you can ever expect. Like, why is he going out of this way to show compassion and helping Elsa when he wants to kill her eventually, and probably Anna too, to take over the throne? Is it because he wants it all to himself? I really don't get it. He also tries to sympathize with her when she is locked up, but she tells him she doesn't know how to stop the winter or anything, solidifying that the only plan that can work is to kill her, and that don't actually make any sense at all to me. Like, really, she just told him she can't, and now he plans on killing her instead because that's somehow going to solve things when Anna gets sent back home, where I guess he just needs to legitimize his marriage first before he can kill her, but that also doesn't make sense when he spills out his plans. So eventually, of course, this is where they come back and get Anna to Hans, where at the same time, this is where they relegate the Duke even more as a character. Like, he just comes a part of the background after these dignitaries just make it known to Hans that without Anna, you are Arendelle's last hope, and virtually by extent ruler. So in that case, he can become king because you know he's the only one they can ever trust and not putting any logical sense into the politics of the world. Sure, this is a kids movie and a nitpicky point, but some consistency would be nice in a movie that doesn't have consistency at all. But yeah, anyways, above all else, this is where the worst twist in cinema history happens, where he betrays everything about his character and becomes a typical villain.
Oh, Anna. If only there was someone out there who loved you.
This section just makes you more confused as hell because of all of what we learned in the book that had to explain his background of abuse. This character doesn't make any sense at all to act the way he was, to be like, ooh, I am a villain and I laugh at your petty pathetic state that you are going to die from, even though I need to marry you to make this all work, but doesn't matter because some random dude from a different country said if you die, Arendelle will accept me because that's just how it works, because I am a villain and I want to become king because my 12 older brothers are just, you know, older than me, and I'm not gonna become king, so I want to become king because I was abused as a child, because that's the only thing that's important to me, because I don't know what else to do. I'm not a terribly great written character at all. I just don't like how he states Elsa was preferable because she was queen, but then states because of how she is, that wouldn't happen, even though he literally arrived and met Anna first to change his plans to like her. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, you didn't actually meet Elsa in the first place until you announced your stupid plans to marry Anna, who the queen already saw through your phony disguise, knowing how insane it is to marry someone you just met. Like, that message is fine, but is he? No. Like, sure, you did make the twist work by having no one see it actually coming at the time, but that's because you really didn't once hint at his character to turn out the way he was from what we learned before and what I just explained in other villainous characters. And continuing on in this scene is where it gets more stupider, where once again we bring up that he wants to kill Elsa, which is literally his plan from the get-go, when he went after Anna instead and didn't do so in this sequence, where he thinks that this is the way to bring back Summer after she said she can't or doesn't know how to do so at this point.
All that's left now is to kill Elsa. and bring back summer.
And when you realize that, you understand how stupid this really is, because in what way do you think killing her is going to solve this? I have already explained this many times in other videos, but still, killing Elsa is no guarantee that this is going to work at all, and he would have made things 10 times worse by making everyone hate him, where it could possibly plunge them into an eternal winter even further, because he thought this was a good idea and this could stop Elsa and, of course, the winter. Where somehow, this is also better than having the Duke be that guy instead, or Elsa as the main villain. Like, really, that doesn't make any sense at all. You haven't set up this good in the entire film.
You won't get away with this.
Oh, I already have.
I mean, what the fuck is wrong with this movie? It just makes it more apparent that you throw him in as the villain at the last minute for this whole motivation and character arc. Like, yeah, sure Hans, be that delusional to think that you're the hero because you know just how magic works in this world and you're going to stop the winter by killing somebody. That's a great character motivation and understanding and intelligence I have ever seen in a movie. And this is where we go back to the dignitaries in the film, where he tries to manipulate them, and how the Duke becomes less of a villainous character now because he's the lackey who believes in the lies that he fears Elsa. That Hans says that Anna is now dead and has the authority to charge Elsa with treason and death for killing her sister, even though she is in prison right now, but of course escapes much to his anger and then chases after her in the storm to manipulate her and get an easy kill, which of course her sadness of the news causes the storm to come to a halt. You know, the funny thing about the scene is how the dignitaries are up on the balcony watching this, and they also see Anna in the moment, but they don't actually react to that moment where she gets frozen after stopping Hans. But I guess they feel sad now because they never made it clear that Hans was a liar to them, where the Duke was also there as well, but also disappears when an emotional moment happens for Elsa and Anna, because I guess he was the villain character, which is stupid to me because he was right there too, like you know, hey look, he's here before and then he's not there, you know, he's right there, then he's not. I mean, I guess he's here too. Oh no, wait a minute, I guess not. And oh wow, they were on a ship too, how convenient. Like, I hate how they just made the scene like he's clear in villainous intent and enjoying killing her, but then stopped by Anna, who disappeared out of nowhere and actually ruined his plans completely because she was still alive, and they actually witnessed that and actually felt sad for her character. Like, yes, he just became more stupid as a villain than you can ever be because he ruined his entire plans, and now he cannot become king because Anna was right in front of him. Even if he were to succeed in killing him, Anna was right there in front of them. I mean, if you think about it, if Anna actually froze in that moment and Elsa still died in that moment, no one would trust him because first, of course, his plans could be the 50-50 of not working, and two, people saw Anna right there in front of them. Kristoff was there, he could testify to that, and he would have ruined his plans of becoming king in the first place, and he would have been the most stupidest person to ever exist and actually thrown back to his own kingdom, being abused more than he's ever been abused. Like, man, this movie is just getting more worse and worse the more I think about it. But then again, that isn't the worst part, because the ending actually destroys them as characters more than you actually realize. Because we see here Hans get humiliated at first, being punched by Anna and then thrown into a jail cell on a boat back home, where the French dude says this.
I will return this scoundrel to his country. We shall see what his 12 big brothers think of his behavior.
Like, what he's saying here, knowing the background of Hans in the book of abuse, this has to be the worst thing you have ever done to him. Like, yes, he is the villain, but then back, you just made things worse than you can realize because of how the books and the movies don't really match up because they designed everything that way. Like, he's going to be abused more than you realize, and that is a very traumatic experience for him. That's a true decision that makes everything awful because you didn't understand anything when making him a villain, where of course at the same time, the movie also remembered it tried to have another villain, but humiliated the Duke by sending him back home because they didn't forget what he did to begin with, while blaming it on fear and nothing else. Like, the pathetic whimper actually reminds us that they had something but actually forgot about it because how they switched characters in the middle towards the end of the film, just to have something unique that other stories didn't have, which failed looking back on the movie 10 years later. And yes, thinking back on it whole, I am just truly shocked to think that I used to love this film when I was 12, but also thinking back on it, I was 12, so that was understandable. But boy oh man, Hans is the worst Disney character ever created looking back on it now as a whole. And making this video was to show how Disney fell after this point, reaching their peak of stupidity after creating a great character like Turbo the year before, where I hope this is a true learning experience about what can go wrong when making a villain. If Elsa was a villain, I really think Frozen would have been a superior story by having events play out a bit more differently, because it never needed that sort of villain that they showed us, even if you think of the grand scheme of the movie. And with that all said, that's all I have to add, and I should actually make a full review of Frozen now that I think about it. So I'm all done. Goodbye.